Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
A diesel-powered engine on a farm works hard and operates in a grueling environment. Soy biodiesel fuels stand up to the challenge of powering farm equipment, but are also renewable and environmentally responsible as well. The Nebraska Soybean Board is committed to encouraging the use of soy biodiesel to protect the environment and sustain Nebraska's agriculture. The Nebraska Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.
Market Journal, television for making agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Extension, where you can know how, know now. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.
Welcome to this week's edition of Market Journal. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. This week, Mike Briggs is our marketing analyst. We'll look at progress in the Farm Bill and other disaster assistance with Brad Lubben. Mike Heckner from CoBank will talk with us about the potential financial repercussions from the current drought, and we'll show you our final interview from China. We last talked with Mike Briggs at the end of June. That was a week before the USDA's planted acreage report, and a time when rains could have pushed corn and soybean markets lower. Now here we are in the second week of August, as the corn crop may be beyond help, and livestock producers are in as tough of a spot as anyone. We talked again with Mike on Wednesday morning. There's a big report coming on Friday with the WASDE, and we'll see what production estimates are. What's best case scenario for that for you?
Best case scenario for that for me is a yield above 130. Not that that gives us an ocean of corn, but that gets us out of that complete disaster area that's under that 120 deal. That really frightens me, especially if we go dramatically. If they come out with a number dramatically under 120, like 112 or 114, then we've got serious issues.
I told you it's good to see you without bruises today. What level, do you think there's a level where corn hits and says, I can't go any higher?
I don't see why, you're doing a lot of demand destruction right here. I don't know why it needs to go. The number you keep hearing bantied around is 850, 865. I don't know why it needs to go above that, because you're gonna crush a lot of things at that point. This silliness that you're gonna have a 10 for that front number, I don't think so, because people will just quit using it.
And it's not necessarily new. We heard that, X number of months ago as well. Are you concerned about 2013?
I think 2013 could be really interesting, and the people that need to be concerned about 2013 are the farmers, because you're gonna have acres next year from here to Christmas. And typically, you don't follow up drought years with another drought year. So if you have big acres and you have normal weather, we're gonna have the biggest corn crop this country's ever seen. We don't have the infrastructure to handle it. You'll have corn piled everywhere, and all of a sudden you'll have $4 corn.
Yeah, let's get into the cattle market. Hasn't been much fun since we last talked to you. Is it going to turn around?
I think we bottomed this market 2 weeks ago. We definitely bottomed it in the feeders, depending a little bit upon Friday's report. If you come out with a 130 plus yield, I think the feeders could quite frankly take off and put $5 to $10 on very quickly. The live cattle, that's a really interesting situation. I'm pretty sure you've bottomed it. We're going to go into some tight supplies. How high can we go? How high can you go before people quit eating it? I don't know. I think it's going to be a real shock to people, because back when you had $2 and $3 a pound hamburger, I think your hamburger is going to cost you $6. And what are people going to do to that? But it's going to have to get that high. If you're going to have $8 corn with $1.25 cost of gains, you're going to have $1.40, $1.50 fat cattle, and that's going to make meat prices get dramatically higher from here.
Well, let's talk about supply. That'll factor in as well. There are a lot of producers that are culling right now, and you factor that into what happened in Texas last year. At what point does it become there is no supply?
That's a great question. We're getting there. Because of what Mother Nature's done, it hasn't allowed us to go ahead and expand, and you can't have pasture conditions like this and expect anybody to expand. And so it's for the foreseeable future. You're going to have 3 or 4 years of normal weather across the country to where people can rebuild, And it just takes time. You know, it's a 3-year program if they started today, so you got to have several years out.
Major supply issues then?
Yeah, major supply issues of cattle.
What are you seeing on weights here? It's been so hot. Has that affected it?
We run sprinklers here, so we've done well there. Yeah, it's affected consumption, so obviously it's going to affect weights, but for the most part it hasn't been terrible. The cattle have acclimated very well to it compared to where they were that first part of July when it started to get hot. That really knocked them down. We're kind of getting through this okay. The thing you're going to see, people are going to be really conscious of their weights going out because of the cost of gains. You can't sit there and wait to put that last pound on because that last pound is just going to cost you too much. So you're going to see weights, not only supply of cattle go down, but you're probably going to see weights of cattle go down, which lessens your beef supply even more dramatically.
Cattle on feed next Friday, what do you expect to see? Too soon to tell?
I think it's a little soon to tell. I think your placements will be down a little bit. And I think you're going to start seeing that cattle on feed number start dropping precipitously under 100 at some point here. I think supplies in October and November are going to be really hard to come by.
What are the concerns that you're hearing from producers? I mean, what's the general concern that they see going forward for the next month? Is there one? What's the worst case scenario, best case scenario?
Well, right now it's really hard to place cattle because you don't know what your feed costs are going to be. You've got ethanol plants closing down all over the place, so you don't have byproduct to feed. Where is your corn going to get priced? Last week I talked to them. The ethanol plant in Columbus, if you had a substantial amount of corn to sell them, they're at 50 over. How do you know where to price your feed? So it's pretty hard to know how to price your feeders. That's the problem that bothers me. Yeah, do I think the cattle market's going to go up? Yeah, but do I think it's going to go up at a pace that's going to outdo what the corn market does to you? I don't know.
You mentioned before we started a Chinese crop that could be very big.
Yes.
You're buying in. They saw you coming from a mile away.
I hope that that's true. I hope that the wheat crop in Europe isn't as bad because wheat is a little bit of a substitute for corn, and that'll eventually take some pressure off us. I think if we have a plus 130 yield out there, I think this corn market will level out down towards 7. Not that 7's great, but it's a lot better than where we are now. And you might be surprised, but then again, like I said, if you come out with a 112 yield, then all hell breaks loose at that point.
Again, the USDA's cattle on feed report is scheduled for release next Friday, the 17th. Over the last month and a half, we've shown you important aspects of China's role in global agriculture. Our trip to Beijing and Shanghai has illustrated how China has leaned on countries, such as the U.S., to meet the demands of a growing population. We've shown you U.S. soybeans unloading at a port outside of Shanghai, a new relationship developed between Nebraska and China, and how farmers in this state are affected by what happens half a world away. In our final interview from China, this time with Eric Trachtenberg from McLarty Associates, you'll hear how China needs those farmers outside its own borders, farmers who are experiencing a much different lifestyle than those within the world's most populous nation.
Well, the farming experiences are very different. You know, U.S. farms are averaging over 400 acres. In China, they average 2. In the United States, we've had 80 years of transformation from, small farm sizes and, kind of elementary types of production. And China's just beginning that evolution. We're right now in the middle of the largest human migration in history. 250 million have moved from the farms to the cities. And probably over the next 10 years, another 50 or 100 million could move after them.
So is that a major concern for this country that is growing still and needing to find a food source for that population?
Well, some things China can produce for itself. For instance, it can produce rice itself, and it's becoming more competitive in terms of poultry production and fresh fruit production. But there's some products it definitely cannot produce for itself. For instance, soybeans. Last year, China imported almost $15 billion worth of soybeans. It imported production from equal to the state of Indiana, if I can say that word in Nebraska. So there's certain products it has to import. And in a year, for instance, where there's a problem with local production, imports play a very key role in stabilizing local food supplies.
So soybeans are already big. You think corn is on the way to becoming bigger? To what extent?
Well, I don't know. I would never say it's going to become bigger than soybeans. It's hard for anything to become
Not necessarily bigger than soybeans, but it's going to grow.
It's going to grow very dramatically. Because if you look at the increases in animal agriculture, the swine sector is changing more from feeding animals random garbage you find on the streets to basically, more modern feed rations. And that'll be more corn.
What does it mean for beef, pork, meat like that?
Well, I think in terms of pork, we're more of a swing supplier. So if China has local production problems, then they tend to import a lot of pork. For instance, 2007, 2008, they had a 17% collapse in local production, and they imported a lot. So whenever local prices are high, they tend to import. In terms of poultry, in a normal year, it would be a major poultry market. But unfortunately, we've had some trade issues, which have actually closed official exports to China, although product does go through Hong Kong. Beef market has great prospects, but again, there is a trade issue, which has basically left the Chinese market closed to official U.S. exports.
How close can this country become to being self-sustainable?
It can. It can do it for some products. The rice, the fruit, a few other things like poultry eventually, maybe. But ultimately speaking, China has very limited arable land. Only about 15% of the country is usable for crops. The rest is desert or forest. And so if you factor in the fact that it has maybe very small percentage of arable land with a large growing population and a population that's also joining the middle class, there's no way they can be efficient and be self-sustainable.
Is the idea then to increase what they can do here and focus more on exports or imports, I guess?
Well, I think it depends. I think it's better to let the market work that out. The products they can produce efficiently, they'll be exporters, like the fruits or the poultry. Some products they'll continue to grow a lot, but they'll also import, like corn. But some products like soybeans and certain value-added products, they'll import. And also the Chinese consumer is very, very worried about food safety. I lived here before when there was the melamine scandal in terms of milk products, and that really damaged the confidence people have. So I think there's room for a lot of imported products, and there's a room for some Chinese competitors to actually send products out.
So certainly that plays a role. Does traceability play a role? Does animal welfare play a role?
Traceability will play a role because, again, the government's focused on food safety, the consumers are focused on food safety. I would expect that to become more of an issue. In terms of animal welfare, it's not an issue yet. But if you look 5, 10, 15 years down the road and they become a middle-class society, those kinds of concerns tend to emerge in wealthier places. So I wouldn't be surprised if it did come up, but it's not here now.
If you missed any of our coverage from China, you can view those videos on our website located here under a special section devoted to our interviews in Beijing and Shanghai. Members of Congress won't be in session again until September 10th. While the House of Representatives didn't move its Farm Bill proposal to the floor before the 5-week recess, it did move on another form of assistance. We talked with UNL Extension Public Policy Specialist Brad Lubben this week about what that proposal looks like.
Well, the House did pass a standalone disaster assistance package after they failed an attempt to attach it to a 1-year extension of the Farm Bill. We don't want to wrap up the Farm Bill just yet, but we did want to address disaster assistance. At least they wanted to address it before they went home to see their constituents here in August.
Which the House did, but the Senate did not.
The Senate was already adjourned by the time the House passed and sent their language over. So we have something that the House has prepared. We have promises perhaps that we'll come back to it in September, but we're still waiting on that package to come to fruition.
Once Congress returns, what does that package look like that it might see?
Right. Well, it really reauthorizes what was in the 2008 Farm Bill, which for the first time authorized this permanent disaster assistance package. It reauthorizes everything except for SURE, which was the crop disaster program. The arguments being, at least politically, that crop insurance is a big budget item. Crop insurance has expanded greatly. Perhaps crop insurance isn't necessary. Well, that doesn't cover every crop in the book clearly very well. But what did get proposed in the disaster package is livestock assistance. The Livestock Indemnity Program, which covers death losses due to disaster events like heat and humidity and stress. The Livestock Forage Disaster Program, which will help cover those forage losses for livestock producers on grazing land. There's an emergency assistance program for livestock, honeybees, and farm-raised fish. It's sort of the catch-all program that covers lots of losses, disaster events, disease issues, etc. And there's a tree assistance program for orchardists and nursery growers. that lose tree stock due to disaster events.
What do the livestock producers need to do if this were to go through? What do they need to look at on their own farm to make sure they can get covered?
I think we can expect it to go through at this point. Whether the standalone bill gets heard in September and covers just 2012, or whether it does still somehow get wrapped up in a broader farm bill debate, it does look like we're reauthorizing disaster assistance. And that means that producers do need good records in order to be able to apply for assistance when the time comes. The livestock indemnity program covers death losses, but we need good records of those death losses and good records of the weather events that led to those losses. The livestock forage disaster program is related to drought losses that are measured by the drought monitor, but are also tied to the number of animals in the herd, the normal grazing capacity, etc. So we need good records on the operation in order to calculate benefits for those farms.
I want to ask you about the overall direction of the Farm Bill. General consensus is nothing gets done until after November elections.
Right.
What happens if there's a change to the status quo in those general elections? If the Democrats lose control of the Senate, House, and it becomes lame duck, what happens then?
Well, clearly there is a lame duck Congress that will likely address the Farm Bill again. Nothing gets done before the election. Perhaps a short-term extension gets done in September, pushes off the deadline until December. We have reason to expect rationally that there will be a debate in December because there are two must-have pieces of legislation in December. One's a must-have bill on how you address the expiring tax cuts. A second is a must-have bill on what you do with the budget, given that if you don't do anything, there's this rather dramatic budget sequestration that kicks in January. So two must-have pieces of legislation that look like they're on the docket for December. That might be the time we tie in a farm bill. If not, then could a dramatic wave either direction in Congress and the White House change how the farm bill debate looks? You could see us push off a temporary extension into 2013 with the expectations that a new Congress really rewrites how the bill works. That's a pretty big challenge considering that the farm bill compromise as currently standing saves budget dollars, and the goal was to save budget dollars in order to pay for those cuts that have to happen by the end of the year. So it's challenging to sort of paint a picture as to how it works in the new year, but it's also challenging to figure out when Congress will get the time to debate this.
Congress is in session starting September 10th, and the current Farm Bill expires on September 30th. Breaking the 100 bushel barrier in soybeans remains a mystery. The August, Nebraska farmer takes a look at what it would take to achieve that objective. Early planting is one proven strategy, but researchers say it's difficult to pinpoint the complex combination of other practices to push up soybean yields. The Nebraska Soybean Board is currently partially funding research sites across Nebraska. You can read more about these yield studies in the August Nebraska Farmer. The adoption of tablet computers is rapidly increasing. CNN reported in late July that 17 million iPads were sold during Apple's fiscal third quarter. Curtis Harms reports on how Market Journal viewers can win an iPad 2 through our mobile app.
The Market Journal mobile app was released in early 2012 for iPads and smartphones, such as iPhones and Android devices. To celebrate the success of the app, Market Journal is hosting its first photo contest for our viewers. To participate, contestants need to download the free Market Journal app on their smartphones through the Google Play or iTunes stores. Once the app is downloaded, participants need to locate the camera feature in the app and take their best photo. This year's theme is soybeans, so photos must somehow relate to soybeans. Once the photo has been captured, it will need to be submitted through the Market Journal app. To be considered for the grand prize, contestants must describe their photo and provide contact information. Each contestant has until September 9th to submit up to 5 different photos, which will be voted on by our Facebook fans. The winner of the photo contest will receive a new iPad in September.
Thanks, Curtis. For official rules and contest guidelines, visit marketjournal.unl.edu/contest. All photos must be submitted by September 9th. The Market Journal Photo Contest is sponsored by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The USDA on Friday released its estimates on projected crop yields across the country. Our taping took place before that release, but those numbers were expected to be much lower than the department's forecast in July. We showed you last week how Nebraska co-ops are planning for a short crop, and this week we look at other financial implications due to the drought with Mike Heckner from CoBank.
CoBank's part of the Farm Credit System. The Farm Credit System was created in 1916. CoBank is a cooperative bank. and it provides financing for agribusiness, rural power, water, and telecommunications for mainly the rural communities in 50 states. I'm based out of Omaha in the state of Nebraska. We provide $2.2 billion of commitments to co-ops in Nebraska.
As we look at this year's drought, we're seeing something different from the agricultural perspective. Whereas the overall economy in the country hasn't been strong, agriculture has been incredibly strong. This year, with the drought that's affecting farmers on both the crop and livestock side, how will it affect what they're able to do, and co-ops as well? Are they financially stable based off of the strong years they've had?
Yeah, Jeff, this drought really catches most farmers and cooperatives in a pretty good position in terms of financial strength. Many of the co-ops that we finance are in very good shape with liquidity. Their working capital levels are high. A lot of that has been built up, as you suggest, with the profitability in the last few years. Debt loads are relatively stable on the lower side for many. They're in a very good position with their balance sheet to confront some adversity.
Let's talk about purchases. Do you think this is something where there's an overall effect that ripples forward in that co-ops or agribusinesses are less likely to make big purchases or big investments?
I think it's reasonable to say that co-ops will probably pause a little bit here on capital expenditures and digest some of the effects of this drought. So, you know, a year or two of taking a break on capital improvements isn't going to be very damaging to any of them.
I know one of the problems or one of the concerns that farmers have is, as you go out and talk to them, they're concerned that this is not only a one-year drought, but maybe it's a 2-year drought or 3-year drought. In your opinion, if that were to happen and the outlook would be dry, would banks be less likely to lend to farmers?
I think we still go back to the fact that balance sheets, both for producers and the co-ops, are in pretty good shape right now. So it does give them some power to withstand the storm. I'd say that because of that positioning, you know, there could be some minor adjustments that have to be made depending on any individual financial situation. But I would say that we're pretty well prepared for this right now.
Can I ask you about the overall state of economy, both what we see in Europe and here at home? Do you think agriculture is positioned in a good place?
I think it's positioned in a very good place, Jeff. I think, you know, everything looked very optimistic and bullish for U.S. agriculture until the drought hit. And now all we're talking about is the drought, but we have to take a look at the long term and take a look at how positive things have been and will be for agriculture.
Now to forecast any chances of precipitation in the next week, here's UNL Extension State Climatologist Al Dutcher.
Well, folks, here we are again for the weather forecast for this next 7-day period. But before we get to that forecast, let's take a retrospective look at this past week. Of course, last weekend we've seen some cool air move into the region, which marked the second consecutive weekend where we see that type of a trend. And maybe this is a sign that we're finally going to break this overall heat pattern as we move toward the fall period. The intensity of this heat does not seem to be lasting as long as it was during the July period when we were pretty much locked into place. So we did see a gradual warm-up as the week progresses, and it peaked out in the middle of the week where we've seen some 100-degree readings across portions of eastern Nebraska. We also see some scattered thunderstorm activity in northern and eastern Nebraska, and in fact a couple tornado reports were also indicated. Isolated in nature, we did see some locations receive some fairly welcome rainfall, other locations high and dry. Now, as we go forward, there are several chances of precipitation moving through this next 7-day period, with the best opportunity for a widespread precipitation event coming in the midweek period. So let's take a look at the upper air models and see what we can expect as we go through this next 7 days. And as we go to the upper air models, the one thing I'll draw your attention to is we do have this trough that was responsible for bringing the cool air into eastern Nebraska is firmly set up across the Great Lakes region. And another piece of energy is going to ride toward the southeast along the periphery of the ridge that is to our southwest, and that may generate some scattered thunderstorm activity across north central, northeast Nebraska during the first half of the day. Some of that activity may make its way down into east central and southeast Nebraska, but it looks to be very isolated if it does. Most of this moisture will really start to generate itself as we get over Iowa and points to the east, so they could be looking at a very welcome and widespread rain event. For today, the highs are going to be primarily in the upper 90s across the southwest. In the northeast, close to this cool air, we'll be looking at low 80s. And as we go into tomorrow, we'll notice that that energy still is in place, and so we expect the widespread precipitation to persist. Here in Nebraska, just isolated chances for scattered thunderstorm and shower activity across northeast and east central Nebraska, pretty much high and dry elsewhere. We'll be again looking at highs in the mid-90s to upper 90s across the southwest, northeast. Will definitely be in the low 80s. Now, as we go into Monday, it looks like the main precipitation will move into the Great Lakes, and anything that does move through this flow will just generate scattered, isolated thunderstorms during the late afternoon hours, and it's going to be very widespread in nature. We'll be looking at highs that again will be in the low 80s across the northeast, and we'll be looking at again the mid-90s predominantly across the southwestern part of the state and possibly the southern panhandle. As we go into Tuesday, the warm air starts to lift back toward the north, so we might bump our temperatures up into the mid-80s across the northeast, looking at the mid to upper 90s across the southwest. Not much in the way of any precipitation. By the time we get into Wednesday, we're going to be looking at a cold front trying to make its way into the northern plains, and so we'll have our warmest day of the week, which will mean temperatures in the mid to upper 90s across the southwest, with possibly a couple 100-degree readings in the southwest. And we'll be approaching the low 90s across the northeast with chance for afternoon thunderstorms as we see a piece of energy moving in the flow across the state during the afternoon hours. The main event occurs as we get into Thursday as that cold air starts to push southward. We're going to see some substantial relief in terms of temperatures. We'll be looking at highs in the low 80s across the north, the low 90s across the south. With thunderstorms expected to generate as this cold air pushes southward, we could see some pretty widespread precipitation somewhere in the state, and it may actually be heavy in certain locations. And as we get into the day on Friday, very cool conditions as we'll be looking at highs that will primarily be in the low 70s across the northeast to the low to mid 80s across the southwest. 8 to 14 day forecast indicates that warm air moves to our east, cool air to our northwest. Precipitation, we're looking at substantial precipitation across the northern plains. Some of that might make it into Nebraska. The below normal precipitation stays from the southeast all the way down into Texas.
Thanks, Al. In the coming weeks, we'll be reporting from soybean management field days in David City and the Goodmanson Sandhills Laboratory Open House near Whitman. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. We'll see you next week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Extension, where you can know how, know now. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
Soybeans are found on dinner tables around the world. Some form of the soybean is found in baby foods, snacks, cooking oils, and many other food items eaten daily. And soybeans provide the protein in the diets for livestock and fish. The Nebraska soybean farmers support research to develop new soy-based products for foods, livestock, and industrial uses through their checkoff dollars. The Nebraska Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.